Part 1. The concept of home deeply resonates across human experience, signifying not merely shelter but also identity, connection, and purpose. For millennia, the narrative of returning home has captivated our collective imagination, reflecting our deepest longings and struggles against forces that pull us adrift. When Odysseus departed from Troy's smoking ruins, he anticipated a journey of mere weeks. Instead, it consumed a decade of his life, a period filled with encounters with monsters and gods, temptations and terrors, profound loss, and personal transformation. The enduring power of his story, even 3,000 years after its initial telling, stems from our ability to see ourselves in Odysseus, the part of us that yearns for home while simultaneously being drawn to adventure, that grapples with duty versus desire, and that must confront both external obstacles and internal demons on the path to becoming whole. Even in our modern world, echoes of Odysseus are ubiquitous, in soldiers returning from war, forever altered by their experiences, in refugees navigating treacherous waters, dreaming of safety, in wanderers seeking to rediscover their true selves. The hero's journey, at its essence, is a path of metamorphosis. We depart as one person and return as another, reshaped by what we've endured, lost, and learned. This epic is not merely an ancient adventure tale. It serves as a map of the human experience itself. To truly grasp this timeless narrative, one must first comprehend the world from which it emerged, a world that was already ancient history to Homer. The events depicted are believed to have occurred around 1200 BC, during the waning years of the Bronze Age. This was a sophisticated era characterized by palaces, extensive trade networks, writing systems, royal bureaucracies, powerful city-states, and significant sea power. However, this established world was on the verge of collapse. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, civilization across the eastern Mediterranean suffered a catastrophic breakdown. Major cities were obliterated, empires crumbled, writing systems vanished, and trade networks disintegrated. The precise causes remain a subject of debate, with theories ranging from climate change, earthquakes, and invasions to internal revolts, or a combination thereof. Regardless of the exact triggers, the outcome was unequivocal. A complex international system was replaced by centuries of what scholars refer to as the Greek Dark Ages. It was during this period that the tales of the Trojan War and its aftermath were preserved and transmitted orally, passing from one generation to the next. When these narratives were finally committed to writing, likely in the 8th century BC, they encapsulated memories of a lost golden age, filtered through centuries of oral tradition. This imparts a fascinating dual perspective to the poem. It is set in the Bronze Age world of kings and heroes but was composed in an emerging era of city-states, colonization, and renewed literacy. Archaeologists have long debated the extent of historical truth embedded within Homer's epic. Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy in the 1870s confirmed that the city itself was not merely a legend. Subsequent excavations at Mycenae Pilus and Ithaca have unearthed palace complexes remarkably similar to those described in the poems. Nevertheless, this work is not a historical account. It is something far more profound, a cultural memory transformed into art, seamlessly blending myth with reality, the divine with the human, and the fantastical with the painfully real. Sing to me, O Muse, of the man of many devices. These words inaugurate one of humanity's greatest literary achievements. Yet, the identity of its composer remains one of literature's most enduring mysteries. Who was Homer? Was he a singular poetic genius, a collective designation for numerous bards, or even a woman, as some scholars have proposed? We may never ascertain the truth. Ancient traditions portray Homer as a blind poet originating from Ionia, in present-day western Turkey. 7 cities contend for the honor of being his birthplace. His name itself might derive from a word signifying hostage, or one who follows, irrespective of his true identity. Homer has come to epitomize the zenith of a sophisticated oral poetic tradition, a tradition that facilitated the composition and transmission of epics of astonishing complexity without the aid of writing. This feat was achievable because Homeric poetry relied on what scholars term formulaic composition. This did not involve simple memorization of fixed texts. Instead, poets mastered a vast repertoire of metrical phrases, recurring scenes, and traditional story patterns that could be intricately woven together during live performance. These poets, known as awada or singers, were essentially oral composers, recreating the epic anew with each performance while preserving its fundamental structure and core themes. They served as the living repositories of their culture, safeguarding not only stories but also values, history, and collective identity. Part 2. Around the 8th century BC, the revolutionary technology of alphabetic writing emerged, making it possible to capture these oral epics in written form. Whether this transcription occurred at the behest of a ruler, such as Pisistratos of Athens, as some traditions assert, or through another process, the outcome fundamentally transformed human culture forever. The text we read today still bears the hallmarks of its oral origins, evident in recurring phrases like "wine dark sea" and "grey-eyed Athena." Familiar scenes follow predictable patterns, and narrative techniques were employed to aid memory and performance. Nevertheless, the work also exhibits signs of a unified artistic vision that only a master poet or poets could have achieved. This ancient masterpiece is not merely a straightforward adventure tale, its structure is as ingenious as its hero, employing sophisticated narrative techniques that would influence storytelling for millennia. Perhaps the most striking of these techniques is Homer's decision to begin in medias res, in the middle of things. Instead of commencing with Odysseus's departure from Troy, we first encounter our hero in his 7th year of captivity on Calypso's island. His preceding adventures, involving the Cyclops, the Sirens, Scylla, and Charybdis, are recounted later through Odysseus's own narration to the Phaeacians. This creates a complex temporal structure. While the poem's 24 books cover approximately 40 days of present time, they encompass a decade of wandering through flashbacks and embedded storytelling. This narrative architecture feels remarkably modern in its complexity. The story also utilizes what scholars call ring composition, a structure where themes and motifs appear and then reappear in reverse order, creating a symmetrical pattern. For example, the epic begins and ends with divine assemblies. Telemachus' journey in search of news about his father mirrors Odysseus' own return voyage. The hospitality Telemachus receives from Nestor and Menelaus contrasts sharply with the violation of hospitality by the suitors back home. These patterns are not merely decorative. They generate meaningful contrasts and parallels that deepen our understanding of the poem's themes. The very language of the epic reflects this intricacy. Written in dactylic hexameter, 6 metrical feet per line, with each foot typically containing one long syllable followed by 2 short ones, the Greek text possesses a distinctive rhythm that carried both artistic and memory-aiding power. This meter became synonymous with epic poetry in the Western tradition. When we compare this epic to its companion work, the Iliad, we observe fascinating contrasts. While the Iliad centers on wrath, glory, and death within the confined space of the Trojan battlefield, the Odyssey embraces a broader geographical and emotional range. It is a poem not of martial glory, but of survival, not of dying nobly, but of living wisely, not of conquering others, but of conquering oneself. At the heart of this expansive narrative stands its protagonist, a hero unlike any who preceded him. Odysseus represents a new kind of heroic ideal, one that would prove remarkably enduring. In the Iliad, Odysseus is a significant but secondary figure, a capable warrior and respected counselor, yet overshadowed by greater fighters like Achilles and Ajax. His true moment arrives after that epic concludes, when he devises the Trojan horse, the stratagem that finally defeats Troy after a decade of stalemated warfare. This emphasis on intellect over brute force defines Odysseus. His very name suggests trouble and cunning, possibly derived from the Greek verb odysasthai, meaning to be wrathful against, or to hate, but also carrying undertones of troublemaking and deception. Homer reinforces this identity through Odysseus's descriptive titles. He is Polytropos, man of many turns, or many ways. He is Polymedes, of many devices, or much cunning. He is Polymechanos, of various wiles. These qualities, rather than strength or speed, define his heroism. This emphasis on intelligence reflects a shift in heroic values. The post-Trojan War world rewards not those who can conquer cities, but those who can navigate complex social and supernatural threats while preserving their identity and relationships. Odysseus embodies survival through adaptability, emerging as a hero suited for uncertain times. Yet, Odysseus's defining strength also becomes his tragic flaw. His cleverness breeds hubris, most fatally in the Cyclops episode, where he cannot resist revealing his true name to the blinded Polyphemus. This act of intellectual pride triggers Poseidon's wrath and condemns his men to years of suffering. There is an inherent duality to Odysseus that makes him fascinatingly human. He is both the faithful husband who rejects immortality to return to Penelope, and the wanderer who spends years in other women's beds. He is both the loving father who weeps at the sight of his son and the commander whose recklessness costs his entire crew their lives. He is both the master storyteller who charms the Phaeacians and the master liar who deceives friend and foe alike. This complexity renders Odysseus the first truly psychological hero in Western literature, a man whose internal struggles are as compelling as his external adventures. His journey is not merely across dangerous seas, but through the treacherous waters of his own nature. Part 3. While Odysseus battles gods and monsters on his journey home, his kingdom of Ithaca faces its own severe crisis, one that threatens the very social fabric of the realm. Homer describes Ithaca as a rocky island kingdom situated off the western coast of Greece. It is not the wealthiest or largest of realms, but it is a place of profound attachment for its absent king. The palace, which once maintained order, has devolved into a site of escalating disorder during Odysseus's prolonged absence. For 3 years, 108 young nobles from Ithaca and neighboring islands have occupied Odysseus's palace, ostensibly competing for Penelope's hand in marriage. However, their behavior reveals their true character. They are not honorable suitors, but rather parasites voraciously consuming the absent king's resources. They slaughter Odysseus's livestock daily for lavish feasts, harass the palace servants, and plot to murder Telemachus. They exhibit utter contempt for the customs of hospitality that form the social foundation of their world. As one character observes, there is no longer any respect for the guest friend or suppliant, or even the gods who dwell in the wide heavens. This situation exposes a profound social and political breakdown. Without Odysseus, there is no clear authority to maintain order. Telemachus is too young and inexperienced to assert control, and Penelope's ambiguous marital status leaves the succession uncertain. The elders of Ithaca prove either unwilling or unable to restrain the unruly young nobles. The crisis in Ithaca serves as a microcosm for broader themes of social order and disorder, raising fundamental questions. What happens to a community when legitimate authority vanishes? How fragile are the customs and laws that bind a society together? Who is responsible for upholding justice when traditional structures fail? The economic ramifications of this crisis are substantial. The suitor's prolonged occupation represents a massive drain on the royal household's wealth, resources that would have taken generations to accumulate. When Odysseus finally returns, he will discover not only his family threatened but his very livelihood severely diminished. At the heart of this crisis stands Penelope, deftly maintaining a precarious balance between resistance and accommodation. Her situation reflects the vulnerable position of women in a society where male protection largely dictates social standing. Without a husband, father, or adult son to defend her interests, she navigates a nearly impossible situation through her intelligence and delaying tactics. Most famously, she employs the scheme of the shroud. She promises to choose a new husband once she completes a funeral shroud for her father-in-law, Laertes. She diligently works at the loom by day, only to secretly unravel her progress each night. For 3 years, this ruse successfully holds the suitors at bay until a disloyal servant woman exposes her deception. This is more than a mere delaying tactic, it is a profound symbol. The act of weaving traditionally defines female virtue in ancient Greek culture. By unraveling her own work, Penelope simultaneously fulfills and subverts feminine expectations. She appears to be a model of industriousness while covertly resisting the very social pressure her weaving ostensibly acknowledges. Penelope's intelligence is evident in other ways as well. She carefully manages the suitors, sometimes placating them with appearances of courtesy while never truly yielding to their demands. She extracts gifts from them, gaining material advantage even as she continues to refuse their central request. Her relationship with Telemachus adds another layer of complexity. She has raised him alone, protecting him from the suitors when he was younger, yet now she must navigate his emerging independence. There are occasional tensions, such as when he orders her back to her quarters during his first assertion of authority. Reflect the awkward transition as he attempts to claim the male authority she has partially assumed in Odysseus's absence. Dreams and omens frequently appear in Penelope's world, suggesting a deep connection to subconscious or divine knowledge. She dreams of her husband, of her brother-in-law in the land of the dead, and of an eagle slaughtering geese that symbolize the suitors. These dreams offer both comfort and confusion, hinting at truths she cannot yet fully comprehend. When news arrives of Telemachus's journey and the suitors plot to murder him, Penelope's distress reveals her emotional vulnerability beneath her calculated facade. For all her resourcefulness, she remains a woman whose entire family hangs in a precarious balance between absence and potential death. Her central position within the household provides a unique vantage point. She observes which servants remain loyal and which have been corrupted by the suitors. She maintains relationships with those she trusts, particularly her faithful attendant Euryclea, who once nursed both Odysseus and Telemachus. Through these domestic networks, she retains a degree of power within the increasingly hostile confines of her own home. Unlike Helen in Sparta, who used drugs to ease painful memories, Penelope preserves grief as a form of loyalty. Her tears and isolation maintain Odysseus's presence in his absence. By refusing to move forward, she creates a space where his return remains possible. This steadfastness has elevated Penelope to an archetype of marital fidelity. However, the poem suggests a more nuanced portrait than simple devotion. Her fidelity is active rather than passive, strategic rather than merely emotional. She demonstrates not just loyalty to her husband, but loyalty to her own authority and judgment. She remains faithful not only to Odysseus but to herself, making her own decisions rather than succumbing to external pressure. When the disguised Odysseus finally meets her late in the epic, their interaction becomes a complex dance of revelation and concealment, testing and being tested. This mutual wariness, the caution of equals who recognize the high stakes of vulnerability, suggests how perfectly matched they truly are and why their reunion, when it finally comes, carries such profound emotional power. Part 4. Beyond the central figures of Telemachus and Penelope lies the broader household, the oikos, which constitutes the fundamental social and economic unit of ancient Greek life. The crisis in Ithaca is not merely a family drama but the unraveling of an entire social ecosystem. The Ithacan royal household encompasses not just the immediate family but concentric circles of dependents, servants, slaves, herders, field workers, and others whose lives are intrinsically linked to the fortunes of the ruling family. In Odysseus's absence, this entire structure has become distorted. Normally, the royal household would function as a center of economic and social order, redistributing resources through feasts, gifts, and patronage. Under Odysseus, goods would flow from the outlying farms and herds to the center, where they would be properly allocated according to status and need. Guests would be received according to their rank, and servants rewarded based on their loyalty and service. The suitors have perverted this natural flow. They arrive uninvited yet demand the treatment of honored guests. They consume without reciprocating, abuse the servants, threaten the heir, and harass the queen. Each feast they demand, sometimes multiple feasts daily, depletes resources that should sustain the entire community throughout the year. Their behavior represents not just a personal affront to Odysseus's family but a profound corruption of the social contract itself. Among the servants, we observe the household's fragmentation. Some, like the swineherd Eumaeus and the nurse Euryclea, maintain unwavering loyalty to the absent king. Others have shifted their allegiance to the suitors, viewing them as the new center of power. The goatherd Melanthius openly supports the interlopers, and various serving women have entered into sexual relationships with different suitors, further fragmenting household cohesion. The physical spaces of the palace reflect this social disorder. Public areas like the Great Hall, intended for legitimate assemblies, guests, and ceremonial functions, have been appropriated for the suitors' perpetual party. Storerooms are depleted, privacy is violated, and boundaries are erased. The ordered space of a proper household has devolved into a zone of transgression. Beyond the palace walls, the crisis extends to Odysseus's broader estates. The suitors slaughter livestock at unsustainable rates, jeopardizing not only present consumption but also future production. The careful husbandry that would maintain herds across generations gives way to short-term plunder. In this context, it becomes clear why the eventual restoration necessitates not just the death of the suitors but a literal cleansing of the household space, washing away blood, fumigating with sulfur, and re-establishing both physical and social boundaries. The return of the king is not merely a personal event but the restoration of an entire economic and social order. Most poignantly, there is the case of Argos, Odysseus's dog, who has aged from a vibrant hunting hound to a neglected creature lying on a dung heap. When he recognizes his disguised master, the only being to do so immediately and without assistance, he wags his tail once and then dies, having lived just long enough to witness his master's return. Argos symbolizes the decay of the household's outer reaches during Odysseus's absence, maintaining loyalty even when care and order have been withdrawn. The crisis in Ithaca thus operates on multiple simultaneous levels: personal, familial, economic, political, and moral. It is this layered crisis that lends Odysseus's eventual return its full significance, making it not merely a husband rejoining his wife but the restoration of proper order to a world turned upside down. What remains remarkable about Homer's depiction is his masterful balance of these social and economic dimensions with deeply personal perspectives. The household exists as both a system and a collection of individuals, as both structure and emotion. Through this dual focus, the poem achieves its unique power, making us keenly feel the intimate human cost of social disorder and the profound relief of restored harmony. Only after establishing the situation in Ithaca and following Telemachus on his journey of discovery does Homer finally introduce us to Odysseus himself. We find him not in the midst of heroic action, but in a state of profound suspension, stranded on the island of Ogygia, held captive by the nymph goddess Calypso. For 7 years, Odysseus has endured this beautiful prison. Calypso's island represents a paradise in material terms, a lush garden with fragrant cypress trees, abundant food, a warm bed, and the love of an immortal being. She has even offered Odysseus what most mortals can only dream of: eternal life, ageless and undying, if he would remain with her as her consort. Part 5. Yet we discover him sitting on the shore, gazing out at the sea, weeping for home. Day after day, he returns to this spot, his tears never exhausted, his longing undiminished by time or comfort. Calypso's paradise has become his purgatory. This powerful image, the man who refuses immortality because it would mean surrendering his identity, reveals the core of Odysseus's character. For what is identity but the sum of our connections? Our history, our place within a human community? Ogygia offers Odysseus physical comfort but denies him his social self. No one on Ithaca would ever know his fate. His name would vanish from human memory. He would exist outside the intricate web of relationships that give his life meaning. Calypso herself presents a fascinating study in immortal psychology. Unlike the monsters Odysseus has faced, she genuinely loves him. She rescued him from certain death, nursed him back to health, and offered him everything within her considerable power. Her island, which she tends alone, reflects both her divine capacity for creation and her fundamental isolation. When Hermes arrives with Zeus's command to release Odysseus, Calypso's response drips with bitter awareness of divine double standards. Male gods routinely pursue mortal women, she argues, yet when a goddess loves a mortal man, they cannot abide it. Her complaint highlights the gendered politics of Olympus and perhaps expresses Homer's subtle critique of patriarchal power. Despite her reluctance, Calypso assists Odysseus in building a raft to leave her island. She provides tools, materials, provisions, and even sailing directions. Her final gift, clothing that keeps him warm and dry, represents her lingering care even as she surrenders him to his chosen fate. The Calypso episode crystallizes a central theme of the epic: the tension between temptation and homecoming. Throughout his journey, Odysseus faces variations of this choice: comfort versus struggle, present pleasure versus future identity, the extraordinary versus the ordinary. Each time, after various delays and diversions, he recommits to Ithaca, to Penelope, to his human, mortal life with all its limitations and connections. This choice gains particular resonance because Odysseus's epithet polytropos, man of many turns, or many ways, suggests his capacity for adaptation, even transformation. He could become many things, inhabit many lives. Yet he insists on returning to his specific life, his particular identity. His flexibility of mind exists in dynamic tension with his unwavering commitment to home. As his raft disappears over the horizon, we leave Calypso on her island, an immortal being forced to confront the transience that defines human experience. Her love for Odysseus has brought her closer to understanding mortality with all its poignancy and urgency. Perhaps this, too, is part of the hero's legacy, changing even the divine beings he encounters by embodying the particular dignity of human limitation. Freedom from Calypso's island does not equate to freedom from danger. 17 days into his voyage, as land finally appears on the horizon, disaster strikes. Poseidon, returning from a visit to the Ethiopians, spots Odysseus on his raft and erupts in rage. The god of the sea has neither forgotten nor forgiven Odysseus for blinding his son, Polyphemus. What follows is one of the epic's most vivid sequences, a storm of literally divine proportions. Poseidon summons winds from all directions simultaneously, raises mountainous waves, and shrouds everything in impenetrable clouds. The careful construction of Odysseus's raft comes apart plank by plank. The sea itself seems to rise against him with conscious malevolence. This storm represents the terrifying power of natural forces, the chaos and violence that lie just beneath the surface of the orderly cosmos. For ancient maritime cultures, the sea embodied both life-sustaining opportunity and ever-present danger. Every voyage was an act of courage, a temporary triumph over elemental forces that could reclaim the traveler at any moment. Odysseus's response reveals both his heroic qualities and his hard-earned wisdom. Unlike earlier in his journey, when he might have defied the god directly, he now recognizes the futility of fighting Poseidon's domain on Poseidon's terms. Part 6. Instead of struggling against impossible odds, he adapts. When his raft finally breaks apart completely, he strips off the clothes Calypso gave him, which now drag him down, and rides a single beam like an experienced horseman. The sea goddess Ino, also called Leucothea, appears, taking pity on the struggling hero. She offers her veil as a magical flotation device, instructing him to discard it once he reaches shore. This divine assistance, Arriving just when Odysseus has exhausted his natural strength, exemplifies a recurring pattern in the epic. The gods help those who help themselves to the utmost extent of their abilities. For 2 days and nights, Odysseus struggles through the raging sea. Here we see the hero stripped to his essential qualities: physical endurance, mental resilience, strategic thinking, and the sheer will to survive. Gone are the trappings of kingship, the company of loyal men, even the clothes on his back. What remains is the core of the hero, the bare man fighting against oblivion. When he finally approaches the shore of Scheria, a new obstacle appears. The coastline offers only jagged rocks where the waves crash with bone-crushing force. Again, Odysseus must think quickly, calculating where a river meets the sea, offering a potential landing spot. Swimming parallel to the coast, fighting exhaustion and despair, he finally finds a protected inlet. Reaching land represents more than physical salvation. It marks Odysseus's transition from the fluid, chaotic realm of Poseidon to the solid, ordered world of human society. His crawl from the water onto the beach, where he collapses in utter exhaustion, evokes both birth imagery and the evolutionary journey from sea to land. Odysseus has survived not just a storm, but a symbolic death and rebirth. Finding shelter beneath 2 intertwined olive trees, one wild, one cultivated, Odysseus creates a nest of leaves and falls into a profound sleep. This humble bed represents his position between worlds, nature and civilization, divine hostility and human hospitality, the wild sea and the ordered community. After 20 days of continuous struggle, he rests at last, ready to emerge into a new phase of his journey. The Poseidon episode demonstrates how the epic combines realistic detail with cosmic significance. Homer's description of the storm, swimming techniques, and coastal hazards reflects intimate knowledge of Mediterranean maritime conditions. Yet, these physical challenges simultaneously function as spiritual and psychological trials. The storm is both a natural disaster and divine retribution, both an external threat and an internal struggle. Through these layered meanings, Odysseus's survival acquires moral and philosophical dimensions. He endures not just through physical strength, but through qualities of mind and spirit, his tenacity, adaptability, and refusal to surrender, even when stripped of all advantages. These qualities establish him as a new kind of hero, one whose greatness lies not in glorious victory, but in the simple, profound achievement of continuing to exist against overwhelming odds. If the Calypso episode explores temptation and the storm sequence tests endurance, the Phaeacian interlude examines something equally essential: the reintegration of the isolated hero into human society. After years of captivity and days of solitary struggle against the elements, Odysseus must remember how to exist among people, how to speak, behave, and present himself in ways that earn acceptance rather than rejection. This process begins with one of the poem's most charming scenes. Princess Nausicaa, daughter of the Phaeacian king and queen, has come to the river near where Odysseus sleeps. Prompted by Athena through a dream, she brings the palace laundry to wash, including her own clothing, with thoughts of future marriage subtly on her mind. After washing and spreading the garments to dry, Nausicaa and her handmaidens play a ball game. Their shouts awaken Odysseus, who emerges from the bushes, naked, caked with salt, and wild, looking after his ordeal at sea. The handmaidens scatter in fear, but Nausicaa alone stands her ground, emboldened by Athena. The encounter that follows showcases Odysseus's diplomatic genius. Though desperate, he recognizes that approaching the princess directly might frighten her. Instead, he keeps his distance and delivers a speech of exquisite tact, comparing her to the goddess Artemis, asking for basic assistance, and appealing to her future happiness in marriage. He transforms himself from a threatening stranger to a worthy suppliant through the power of language alone. Nausicaa responds with matching graciousness. She offers clothing, food, directions to the palace, and practical advice about approaching her parents. Her composure and generosity, especially remarkable in one so young, establish her as an exemplar of proper treatment of strangers. If the suitors in Ithaca represent the violation of hospitality norms, Nausicaa embodies their perfect fulfillment. Part 7. Beneath this formal exchange runs a current of unacknowledged attraction. Homer subtly indicates Nausicaa's interest in the mysterious foreigner through her comment to her handmaidens that she wouldn't mind a husband like him, and her hope that he might stay in Phaeacia. For his part, Odysseus recognizes her exceptional qualities, paying her the highest compliment he can offer when he compares her to a young palm tree he once saw at Apollo's shrine in Delos. Yet both understand the impossibility of any deeper connection. Odysseus's heart remains fixed on home. Nausicaa, for all her youthful fascination, maintains the decorum proper to her station. Their interaction exemplifies a bittersweet recognition of what might have been under different circumstances, a road not taken, gracefully acknowledged and set aside. Following Nausicaa's advice, Odysseus approaches the palace indirectly, receiving Athena's assistance in the form of a concealing mist as he enters the city. The Phaeacian palace itself represents the pinnacle of civilized existence, gleaming with bronze, silver, and gold, surrounded by perpetually fruiting orchards, and attended by skilled servants. The royal couple, Alcinous and Arete, preside over an island untouched by war, blessed with exceptional ships that cross the sea, swift as a bird or thought itself. When Odysseus enters as a suppliant, grasping Queen Arete's knees in the traditional posture of request, the Phaeacians respond with model hospitality. They offer food, drink, and lodging before even asking his name or business. They promise safe passage to his destination. They treat him not as a suspicious foreigner, but as a guest under divine protection, which, given Athena's involvement, he truly is. The following day, the Phaeacians honor their guest with athletic games. When one young athlete insults Odysseus, suggesting he looks more like a merchant than a sportsman, the hero responds by easily winning the discus throw, demonstrating that his strength and athletic prowess remain intact despite his recent ordeal. This small victory foreshadows his eventual triumph over the young suitors at home. The evening feast brings the pivotal moment of the Phaeacian episode. The court bard Telemachus sings of the Trojan War, first of a quarrel between Odysseus and Achilles, and later of the Trojan horse strategy that Odysseus devised. Hearing these tales of his former glory, Odysseus weeps behind his cloak, moved by memories of friends lost and hardships endured. King Alcinous notices his guest's distress and gently asks the question that transitions the epic from third-person narration to a first-person account. "Who are you? Tell us your name." In response, Odysseus finally reveals his identity and begins the tale of his wanderings since leaving Troy, a narrative that will occupy the next 4 books of the epic. This moment of revelation carries enormous emotional weight. For the first time since leaving Calypso's island, Odysseus publicly reclaims his name and identity. He steps out of anonymity into his own legend, bridging his past glory and his present circumstances. The attentive, admiring Phaeacian audience represents a first step toward the restoration of his social standing, a receptive community that acknowledges his trials and celebrates his resilience. The Phaeacian episode thus serves multiple narrative functions. It provides Odysseus with a sympathetic audience for his tale, creating the framed story that allows his earlier adventures to be recounted. It demonstrates the proper functioning of hospitality to contrast with its perversion by the suitors. It shows Odysseus relearning social skills that years of isolation had forced him to set aside. More subtly, the Phaeacians represent an idealized society, a kind of halfway point between the magical realms Odysseus has traversed and the flawed, complex human world of Ithaca. Their exceptional ships, their blessing by the gods, and their freedom from ordinary toil all place them at the border between the mundane and the marvelous. They serve as a transitional space for Odysseus, allowing him to process his extraordinary experiences before returning to ordinary human society. When Odysseus concludes his tale, the Phaeacians load him with gifts. more treasure than he would have received from his share of Troy's plunder had he returned directly. They deliver him, asleep, to the shores of Ithaca, gently placing him and his new wealth on the beach before departing. This peaceful transition from guest friend to returned king contrasts sharply with the violent homecoming he must now undertake. The Phaeacian interlude thus completes Odysseus's emergence from isolation and anonymity. Having survived divine imprisonment and natural catastrophe, having reclaimed his name and shared his story, he now stands ready to reclaim his place in the human world, not as a supplicant seeking acceptance, but as a king determined to restore justice to his domain. Part 8. Seated among the Phaeacians, their guest of honor in a gleaming hall far from home, Odysseus begins his tale. His voice, unaccustomed to such extended speech after years of isolation, carries the weight of memories long suppressed. The attentive silence of his audience mirrors our own as we finally hear directly from the hero about the lost decade between Troy's fall and Calypso's island. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes," he declares, claiming his identity in full for the first time since leaving Ogygia. This self-naming is itself an act of courage. In a world where names carry power, Odysseus had learned the danger of revelation when his proud declaration to the Cyclops triggered Poseidon's wrath. Yet here, among potential allies, he reclaims his name and the story attached to it. What follows is not a straightforward chronology, but a carefully structured narrative. Odysseus proves himself as masterful a storyteller as he is a strategist. He selects, arranges, and emphasizes events to create maximum impact on his audience. Whether every detail is precisely as it occurred matters less than the truth of the experience, the emotional reality of a journey that tested human limits in every way imaginable. From Troy. With a fleet of 12 ships and their crews, Odysseus first raids the land of the Ciconies. This brief military adventure, successful at first but then turning against the Greeks when reinforcements arrive, serves as a transition from the warrior world of the Iliad to the more complex moral universe of the Odyssey. The men seize plunder, kill men, and take women captive, behaving as conquering soldiers typically did. Odysseus urges a quick departure, but his men prefer to feast on the beach, leaving themselves vulnerable to counterattack. When the Ciconian reinforcements arrive, the Greeks suffer significant casualties, losing 6 men from each ship before escaping back to sea. This small defeat foreshadows greater losses to come and establishes a pattern. Odysseus often provides sound counsel that his men disregard to their detriment. Blown off course by storms, they next encounter the Lotus Eaters, a people who subsist on a flowering plant that induces peaceful forgetfulness. The men Odysseus sends to explore eat the lotus and lose all desire to return home, wishing only to remain and consume more of the dream-inducing food. Odysseus physically drags them back to the ships, ties them beneath the benches, and orders immediate departure. The Lotus Eaters present no direct threat of violence. Yet, they embody a more insidious danger, the temptation to surrender purpose, memory, and identity for the sake of pleasant sensation. Their episode, though brief, introduces the central theme of the epic, the tension between the allure of forgetting and the painful necessity of remembering. Throughout his wanderings, Odysseus will face variations on this choice, consistently rejecting easy escape in favor of the harder path homeward. The next landing brings disaster on an entirely different scale. Arriving at the land of the Cyclopes, giant solitary shepherds without laws or community, Odysseus takes 12 men to explore a cave well stocked with cheese and milk. Despite his companions urging to take provisions and leave, Odysseus insists on waiting to see the cave's owner, hoping for guest gifts. When Polyphemus returns and discovers the intruders, he reveals a monstrous disregard for divine law. "We don't care about Zeus or blessed gods," he tells Odysseus before seizing 2 men, smashing their heads against the ground, and devouring them raw. He then blocks the cave entrance with a massive boulder and sleeps, trapping the survivors for a grim morning meal. The Cyclops episode unfolds as a contest between brute strength and intelligence. Unable to move the boulder themselves, the Greeks cannot simply flee. Direct combat would likewise prove fatal against the giant's physical power. Odysseus must rely on stratagem, the quality that defines him. His plan proceeds in careful stages. First, he offers the Cyclops potent wine, loosening the monster's caution. When Polyphemus asks his name, Odysseus gives the cunning reply, nobody, *Udis* in Greek. Then, while the giant sleeps in drunken stupor, Odysseus and his men harden a massive wooden stake in the fire and drive it into the Cyclops' single eye. Polyphemus's agonized roar brings other Cyclopes to his cave. But when they ask who harmed him, he can only answer, "Nobody is killing me by craft, not force." Taking this literally, they depart, leaving him to his misery. Odysseus has weaponized language itself, using the ambiguity between a name and a negation to escape immediate retribution. Part 9. To escape the cave. The Greeks cling to the undersides of the Cyclops' sheep as he lets them out to pasture, hiding among the dense wool where the blind giant can only feel along their backs. This escape demonstrates Odysseus' tactical creativity, finding the one path where the monster's remaining senses cannot detect them. Yet, at the moment of apparent triumph, Odysseus makes a fatal error. Safe aboard his ship, pulling away from shore, he cannot resist the urge to mock Polyphemus and, most crucially, reveal his true name. "If any mortal asks who blinded you," he shouts, "tell them it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, whose home is Ithaca." This moment of hubris transforms a tactical victory into a strategic catastrophe. Polyphemus, now knowing his attacker's identity, prays to his father, Poseidon, for vengeance. The sea god hears his son's plea, setting in motion the divine enmity that will cost Odysseus all his ships, all his men, and nearly a decade of wandering. The Cyclops episode is rich with symbolic dimensions. Polyphemus represents pre-civilized existence, a world without agriculture, laws, assembly, or ships. His single eye suggests limited perspective, unable to perceive depth or complexity. His dwelling in isolation without community reflects an existence contrary to Greek ideals of the polis. By blinding him, Odysseus asserts the superiority of civilization, strategy, and collective action over solitary brute force. Yet, the episode also reveals Odysseus's fatal flaw: the pride in his own cleverness that drives him to claim credit for his deed. The name that he has spent the epic trying to live up to return to, becomes the very thing that extends his wanderings. Identity proves both essential and dangerous, a double-edged sword that cuts both ways. After escaping Polyphemus, Odysseus's fleet reaches the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. This divine host treats them hospitably for a month, then provides supernatural assistance for their journey home. A leather bag containing all contrary winds, leaving only the westerly breeze free to blow them straight to Ithaca. For 9 days, Odysseus personally mans the sheet, refusing sleep as they sail homeward. Success lies literally within sight. They draw close enough to Ithaca to see people tending fires on shore. At this pivotal moment, exhaustion finally overcomes the hero, and he falls into a deep slumber. His men, long suspicious of the mysterious bag which Odysseus has guarded closely, see their opportunity. Assuming it contains treasure their leader intends to keep for himself, they open it while he sleeps. The captive winds explode outward in a devastating storm that blows the fleet back across the sea to Aeolus' island. When Odysseus returns to request further help, Aeolus recoils in horror. Any man so clearly cursed by the gods, he reasons, deserves no assistance. This second rejection by Aeolus, refusing even to hear Odysseus' plea, emphasizes how one failure of trust compounds into greater isolation. The Aeolus episode reinforces the theme of nearly achieving home only to face renewed exile. It also highlights the fatal dynamic between Odysseus and his men, his secrecy breeding their suspicion, their impulsiveness undermining his strategy. Neither fully trusts the other. creating a cycle of misunderstanding with tragic consequences. 6 days of rowing brings the weary fleet to the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. Odysseus prudently keeps his own ship outside the harbor while sending scouts ahead. This caution saves him, but cannot protect the rest of the fleet. The Laestrygonians destroy 11 ships and devour their crews, spearing the men like fish and carrying them off for their grisly feast. Only Odysseus's ship escapes the massacre. In a matter of moments, he has gone from commanding hundreds of men to just dozens. His responsibility is both diminished and intensified by this catastrophic loss. The swift, brutal destruction of nearly his entire expedition marks the darkest point of his journey, and sets up the extended interlude on Circe's island that follows. With one ship and an increasingly desperate crew, Odysseus lands on Aea, home of the enchantress Circe. Dividing his remaining men into 2 groups, he sends the first, led by his kinsman Eurylochus, to explore. They discover a palace surrounded by docile lions and wolves, animals transformed by Circe's magic. Inside, the goddess welcomes them with a feast laced with enchanted ingredients. After they eat, she touches them with her wand, transforming all but Eurylochus, who had remained suspicious outside, into swine, maintaining their human minds within animal bodies. Part 10. When Eurylochus returns with news of this horror, Odysseus sets out alone to confront the goddess. On his way, he meets Hermes, who provides both a magical herb called moly to protect against Circe's spells and specific instructions for subduing her. Following this divine guidance, Odysseus resists the enchantress's magic, draws his sword against her, and compels her to swear an oath not to harm him. This encounter transforms into an extended stay on Aea. Circe restores the men to human form, hosts the crew for a full year of feasting, and becomes Odysseus's lover. This interlude of pleasure and respite seems to make the crew forget their homeward mission entirely. Only when his men finally confront him, appealing to his desire for home, does Odysseus approach Circe about departure. Her response introduces the next essential challenge. Before they can return home, she tells them they must journey to the land of the dead to consult the prophet Tiresias. This requirement for catabasis, descent to the underworld, marks a crucial spiritual dimension of Odysseus's journey. To move forward, he must first go deeper, confronting death itself and the shadows of his past. Following Circe's detailed instructions, Odysseus sails to the western edge of the world, where the sun never shines and the rivers of the underworld flow into the ocean. There he performs the prescribed rituals, digging a pit, pouring libations, sacrificing animals, and letting their blood flow to attract the spirits of the dead. The shades gather, drawn by the scent of blood, but Odysseus holds them at bay with his sword until Tiresias arrives. The blind prophet drinks from the sacrificial blood and delivers his crucial prophecy. He warns of the danger posed by Helios's cattle on Thrinacia, predicts Odysseus's eventual return to Ithaca and his confrontation with the suitors, and foretells a final journey inland carrying an oar, seeking peoples who mistake it for a winnowing fan because they know nothing of the sea. After receiving this prophecy, Odysseus allows other spirits to approach the blood and speak with him. His mother, Anticlea, who had been alive when he left for Troy, reveals she died of grief during his long absence. Her shade tries to embrace him 3 times, but passes through his arms like smoke, a heart-rending portrayal of the unbridgeable divide between the living and the dead. Odysseus also encounters famous women from myth and legend, as well as former comrades from Troy. The spirit of Agamemnon warns him to return to Ithaca in secret, trusting no one, after his own murder at the hands of Clytemnestra and her lover. Achilles, once glory-seeking in life, delivers perhaps the epic's most famous line: "I would rather be a hired laborer on earth serving a man of little property than rule over all the dead." Most poignant is Odysseus's encounter with Ajax, who had committed suicide after losing a contest with Odysseus over Achilles' armor. Despite Odysseus's appeals, Ajax's spirit refuses to speak to him, maintaining in death the grudge that destroyed him in life. This silent rejection reminds us of the human cost of Odysseus's competitive excellence, how his victories have sometimes created enduring wounds in others. The underworld sequence serves multiple purposes in the epic. It allows Odysseus to gain crucial knowledge for his journey home. It reconnects him with his past, both personal and mythic, reminding him of what has been lost and what remains at stake. It provides a metaphysical dimension to his physical wanderings, suggesting that full homecoming requires reconciliation with death and memory, as well as physical return to Ithaca. When Odysseus and his crew return to Aea, Circe provides detailed guidance for the remaining challenges of their journey. She outlines 3 specific dangers: the sirens, whose enchanting song lures sailors to their death; the passage between Scylla and Charybdis, where they must choose between losing some men or the entire ship; and the island of Thrinacia with its sacred cattle of Helios, which must be left untouched despite any hunger or hardship. Part 11. Armed with this foreknowledge, Odysseus prepares specific countermeasures for each threat. For the sirens, he has his men plug their ears with beeswax while he himself is bound to the mast, allowing him to experience their song without being able to act on its fatal enticement. This famous image of the bound hero, straining against his ropes as he hears the irresistible voices, captures the essence of Odysseus's journey. He experiences what would destroy others, yet survives through a combination of foresight, discipline, and willing acceptance of temporary constraint. The content of the siren's song proves revealing. They tempt Odysseus not with sensual pleasure, but with knowledge. "We know all that happens on the fertile earth," they claim. Their appeal targets his intellectual curiosity, his desire to know and understand, which has driven both his greatest achievements and his most costly mistakes. By hearing their song but denying himself the fatal approach to their island, Odysseus achieves a rare balance between experience and restraint. Next comes the most agonizing decision of the journey: to reach home. The ship must pass either through the strait where the 6-headed monster Scylla dwells, or near the deadly whirlpool, Charybdis. Circe has advised the first option. Better to lose 6 men, she counseled, than the entire crew. Odysseus accepts this terrible calculus, but initially conceals from his men that some of them must die regardless of his seamanship. As they approach the strait, Odysseus arms himself despite Circe's warning that fighting Scylla is futile. This gesture reveals his character, even knowing he cannot save all his men. He refuses passive acceptance of their loss. While the crew's attention fixes on the more visible danger of Charybdis, Scylla strikes suddenly from above, snatching 6 men from the deck. Odysseus describes their deaths in excruciating detail, arms and legs flailing, voices calling his name as they are lifted toward the monster's cave. Their final struggles as they are devoured alive. This moment, when Odysseus must watch his companions die while continuing to navigate forward, represents the ultimate burden of leadership, the responsibility to continue functioning even while processing unbearable loss. The Scylla episode strips away any romanticized notion of heroism, showing instead its raw emotional cost. Having navigated these dangers, the depleted crew reaches Thrinacia, island of the sun god's sacred cattle. Despite Tiresias's and Circe's explicit warnings to avoid landing there, a storm forces them ashore. Odysseus makes his men swear an oath not to touch the cattle regardless of hardship. For a month, they subsist on birds and fish. But when unfavorable winds trap them on the island and supplies run out, starvation looms. When Odysseus goes inland to pray for divine assistance, his absence creates an opportunity for temptation. Eurylochus persuades the hungry crew that it would be better to risk divine punishment than face certain death by starvation. They slaughter the finest of Helios's cattle, justifying their transgression with promised sacrifices and temple offerings upon their safe return home. Odysseus returns to discover the deed already done. Despite performing the proper rituals with the meat, ominous signs appear. The hides of the slain animals creep across the ground, and the meat itself lows on the spit as if still alive. These uncanny manifestations signal the depth of their transgression against cosmic order. When they finally depart the island, Zeus fulfills his promise to the outraged Helios. A devastating storm destroys the ship, killing all aboard except Odysseus, who lashes together the mast and keel to form a makeshift raft. Carried back past Scylla and Charybdis, he barely survives being sucked into the whirlpool, clinging to a fig tree growing from the cliff until his raft reappears on the churning surface. 9 days adrift brings him finally to Ogygia, Calypso's island, completing the circle of his narrative. From this lowest point, having lost his men, his ship, and seemingly his hope of return, we have already witnessed his eventual escape with divine assistance, and his arrival among the Phaeacians. Part 12. As Odysseus concludes his tale, silence falls over the Phaeacian hall. This extended first-person narrative has revealed dimensions of the hero invisible from the outside: his decision-making process, his emotional responses to loss, his moments of both brilliance and error. By allowing Odysseus to tell his own story, Homer gives him agency in shaping his identity through narrative. Just as he must rebuild his identity through action upon returning to Ithaca. The wanderings Odysseus describes map not just geographical space, but moral and psychological territory. Each adventure tests specific aspects of human nature: the allure of forgetfulness among the lotus eaters, the tension between civilization and savagery with the Cyclops, the balance of trust and suspicion with Aeolus and his men, the temptation of pleasure and stasis with Circe, the hunger for forbidden knowledge with the Sirens, the impossible choices between types of loss with Scylla and Charybdis, and the desperate rationalizations that lead to tragic transgression with Helios's cattle. Together, these episodes form a complex exploration of human limitations and aspirations. They reveal Odysseus as neither a perfect hero nor a mere victim of divine caprice, but as a man navigating impossible circumstances with extraordinary yet flawed capabilities. His survival when all others perish results from a combination of divine favor, personal excellence, and simple luck, a trinity of factors the Greeks recognized as governing human fortune. As the Phaeacians prepared to deliver Odysseus to Ithaca with ships swift as thought itself, the wandering phase of his journey concludes. Ahead lies an even greater challenge, not surviving among monsters and gods, but reclaiming his place in the human world he left behind 20 years before. The skills, insights, and determination forged through his wanderings will now be tested in the complex social landscape of home. The Phaeacians deliver on their promise. Their miraculous ship carries the sleeping Odysseus across the sea to Ithaca, where they gently place him and his newfound treasures on the shore before departing. When Odysseus awakens, he finds himself surrounded by morning mist, unable to recognize the very homeland he has struggled so long to reach. This moment of disorientation captures a profound truth about homecoming after prolonged absence: places change, and memory proves unreliable. The returning traveler must reconcile the home of imagination with the reality that confronts them. For Odysseus, this reconciliation begins with uncertainty bordering on despair. Has he been deceived, abandoned on some strange shore with his gifts? Athena appears, first disguised as a young shepherd, then revealing herself to her favorite mortal. Their exchange highlights their special relationship, a blend of divine patronage and mutual respect. When Athena asks why he doesn't immediately recognize his homeland, Odysseus initially responds with caution, fabricating a false tale about his identity. The goddess smiles at this reflexive deception, noting with approval that anyone who matched Odysseus in craft would need to be a champion deceiver. Together, they hide his treasures in a nearby cave. Then, Athena transforms him into an aged beggar, stooping his posture, wrinkling his skin, clouding his bright eyes, and clothing him in rags. This disguise serves multiple purposes. Practically, it protects him from the suitors who would kill him on sight. Strategically, it allows him to observe the situation in his palace unrecognized, testing loyalties before revealing himself. Symbolically, it represents his liminal status, physically present in Ithaca, but not yet restored to his proper identity and position. Athena, meanwhile, departs for Sparta to retrieve Telemachus, who has lingered perhaps too long, enjoying Menelaus's hospitality. The young man, warned through a dream of the suitor's ambush, begins his journey homeward alongside the synchronized return of his father, one of several carefully constructed parallel movements that characterize the epic's later books. Disguised as a beggar, Odysseus seeks out the dwelling of his swineherd, Eumaeus. Following Athena's guidance, this humble hut, far from the corrupted splendor of the palace, becomes the staging ground for the eventual reclamation of his kingdom. Here, Odysseus encounters the first example of unwavering loyalty among his servants. Despite his ragged appearance, Eumaeus welcomes the stranger with every hospitality his modest means allow, sharing food, providing shelter, and treating him with dignity. Part 13. This warm reception contrasts sharply with the treatment Odysseus will later receive from the suitors, highlighting one of the epic's central themes. True nobility manifests in behavior rather than birth or wealth. Eumaeus, though a slave, embodies the ethical code that the high-born suitors violate. His hospitality toward a seeming beggar reveals more genuine aristocratic values than the destructive entitlement of those occupying the palace. Over a simple meal, the disguised Odysseus and Eumaeus exchange stories. Odysseus creates an elaborate false tale about his identity, claiming to be a Cretan warrior who fought at Troy, suffered many misadventures, and eventually heard news of Odysseus preparing to return home. This embedded narrative showcases the hero's improvisational genius while revealing how he gathers information without exposing himself. Eumaeus responds with skepticism about the news of his master's imminent return. He has heard too many false reports from travelers seeking advantage, but shares his own life story. He reveals he was born a prince, kidnapped by Phoenician traders with the help of a treacherous nursemaid, and eventually purchased by Laertes, Odysseus's father. This narrative creates a poignant counterpoint. The nobleman living as a slave speaks with the king disguised as a beggar, each temporarily separated from his true status. For several days, Odysseus remains with Eumaeus, learning about conditions in Ithaca and observing the swineherd's steadfast character. This interlude in the countryside allows Homer to develop a fuller picture of Ithaca beyond the palace walls, showing how Odysseus's prolonged absence has affected the broader community and economy of his kingdom. Through conversations with Eumaeus and later with other characters, Odysseus learns how his herds have been depleted, how different servants have responded to the crisis, and how the political situation has deteriorated in his absence. The tranquility of the swineherd's hut is broken by the arrival of Telemachus, who has successfully evaded the suitors' sea ambush. Following Athena's instructions, he has landed in a remote part of Ithaca and made his way directly to Eumaeus rather than returning to the palace. This caution demonstrates his growing maturity, a stark contrast to the naive youth who departed weeks earlier. When Eumaeus leaves to bring news of Telemachus's safe return to Penelope, Athena appears, visible only to Odysseus, instructing him to reveal himself to his son. With a touch of her wand, she temporarily restores his true appearance. The disguise falls away, and Odysseus stands before his son in his actual form. Strong, handsome, regal. Telemachus's reaction reveals both the emotional power and potential danger of this moment. Initially believing the transformation indicates a god in disguise, he averts his eyes, declaring, "Just now you were old and shabbily clothed, but now you are like the gods who rule the wide heavens." When Odysseus identifies himself as his long-lost father, Telemachus remains doubtful. "You cannot be my father, Odysseus. Some god is deceiving me to make my grief even more painful." This resistance to recognition, the fear of false hope after so many years of disappointment, makes their eventual embrace all the more powerful. When the full realization finally comes, both men weep openly. Homer compares their crying to the keening of eagles whose nestlings have been stolen, a rare simile likening human emotion to the animal world rather than the reverse, emphasizing the primal nature of their reconnection. Once the initial surge of emotion subsides, father and son begin plotting the suitor's destruction. This immediate transition from reunion to conspiracy emphasizes the context of their relationship, not a peaceful homecoming, but a preparation for necessary violence. Odysseus outlines his strategy. Counting the suitors' numbers, assessing potential allies, and instructing Telemachus on his role in the coming confrontation. Despite 20 years of separation, they quickly establish a working partnership based on their shared goal and complementary skills. Odysseus resumes his beggar disguise before Eumaeus returns, maintaining the deception for all except his son. Together they prepare to enter the palace, Telemachus first to avoid suspicion, with the disguised Odysseus to follow later, as a seemingly random beggar seeking charity. This approach will allow Odysseus to observe the situation firsthand while positioning himself for the eventual attack. Part 14. Before this plan unfolds, Homer provides a touching counterpoint with the story of Argos, Odysseus's hunting dog. Once renowned for his speed and keen senses, Argos now lies neglected on a dung heap, old, flea-ridden, and abandoned. Yet when Odysseus passes by, the dog recognizes his master, despite the disguise no human can penetrate. With his last strength, Argos wags his tail and drops his ears in greeting, then dies, having fulfilled his final purpose, bearing witness to his master's return. This brief, heartbreaking scene offers multiple layers of significance. It provides Odysseus with uncomplicated recognition after so much doubt and deception. It symbolizes the decay of his household through neglect. It suggests how even the most faithful eventually succumb to time's passage. Perhaps most powerfully, it demonstrates how love can pierce disguise when reason cannot, a theme that will recur when the old nurse Euryclea later recognizes Odysseus by his distinctive scar. Telemachus returns to the palace first, reuniting with Penelope, who embraces him with relief, but remains unaware of the momentous changes underway. Shortly afterward, Eumaeus leads the disguised Odysseus to the palace, where he will directly experience the disorder that has overtaken his home. As they approach, they encounter another of Odysseus's servants, the goatherd Melanthius, who has allied himself with the suitors. Unlike Eumaeus, Melanthius responds to the apparent beggar with contempt and physical abuse, kicking him and mocking his poverty. This encounter, juxtaposed with Eumaeus' kindness and Argos's recognition, establishes the spectrum of loyalty and betrayal Odysseus will navigate within his own household. Entering his palace as a beggar, Odysseus experiences the final humiliation of his journey, becoming an object of entertainment and abuse in his own halls. The suitors, particularly Antinous, their ringleader, treat him with calculated cruelty. When Odysseus begs for food, Antinous hurls a footstool at him, striking him in the back. This brutal act crystallizes the moral corruption of the suitors, not just their consumption of Odysseus's resources, but their violation of the sacred obligation to treat strangers and suppliants with dignity. Odysseus absorbs this abuse with outward patience that masks inward fury. Each insult adds to the justified rage that will eventually explode in bloody retribution. Yet his restraint demonstrates extraordinary self-control, the same quality that allowed him to endure Polyphemus's cave and Calypso's island. Now within sight of his goal, he maintains his disguise despite enormous provocation. Not all within the palace treat him with contempt. Penelope, hearing of the stranger's arrival and the abuse he suffered, summons him to ask if he has news of Odysseus. Their conversation, with the queen unaware she speaks to her husband, creates dramatic irony of the highest order. Odysseus fabricates yet another false tale, claiming to have hosted the real Odysseus years ago and offering detailed predictions about his imminent return. This extended scene between disguised husband and questioning wife explores the paradox of intimate estrangement. They sit together, physically close yet separated by deception and uncertainty. Odysseus must suppress his desire to reveal himself, while Penelope struggles between hope sparked by the stranger's convincing claims and the caution born from years of disappointment. Their conversation deepens our understanding of Penelope, revealing her intelligence, her diplomatic skill in extracting information, and her emotional resilience. When the disguised Odysseus accurately describes clothing and companions from 20 years earlier, she weeps with recognition of these details, but still does not make the final connection to the man before her. The barriers to recognition are not just physical disguise, but the psychological protection she has built against false hope. Their exchange also establishes the final test Odysseus must pass to reclaim his place. Penelope announces she will set a contest for the suitors. Whoever can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe handles will win her hand. This challenge, impossible for any man except Odysseus himself, becomes the mechanism for the approaching confrontation. Part 15. One last recognition scene unfolds before the contest when the aged nurse Euryclea bathes the disguised Odysseus's feet and recognizes a distinctive scar on his thigh, received during a boar hunt in his youth. Unlike Argos's silent recognition, this moment threatens to expose Odysseus prematurely. He grasps her throat to prevent her exclamation, warning her to keep his identity secret, even from Penelope. This partial recognition illustrates another pattern in the epic. Those with least social power often perceive truth most clearly. The dog, the nurse, and the swineherd all recognize aspects of Odysseus that remain hidden from those with greater authority. Their loyalty stems not from social obligation, but from genuine devotion, making them essential allies in the coming restoration. As the day of the contest approaches, omens multiply. Zeus sends thunder from a cloudless sky. Theoclymenus, a seer who has taken refuge with Telemachus, experiences a horrific vision of the suitors, blood-dripping walls, ghostly figures, and the sun darkening, a premonition of impending slaughter that the suitors mockingly dismiss. These supernatural signs reinforce the moral framework of the coming violence. The suitors' destruction is presented not merely as Odysseus's personal vengeance, but as divine justice, the inevitable consequence of their violations against home, hospitality, and proper social order. When Odysseus strings the bow and looses his arrow in the following books, he acts as an instrument of cosmic restoration as much as a man reclaiming his own. The extended sequence of Odysseus's disguised observation, moving from countryside to palace, from loyal servants to treacherous ones, from dog to nurse to wife, serves essential narrative purposes. It creates suspense by delaying the climactic confrontation. It allows Homer to develop a detailed picture of how Ithaca has changed in Odysseus's absence. Most importantly, it establishes the moral justification for the extreme violence to come, showing the depth of corruption that necessitates such a bloody cleansing. Through these scenes, disguise becomes more than a tactical device. It transforms into a profound metaphor for Odysseus's liminal status. Physically present yet socially absent, he occupies the margins of his own kingdom, seeing it through the unfiltered perspective of society's least powerful members. This experience changes him, deepening his understanding of loyalty, power, and justice beyond what his years as acknowledged king had taught him. The beggar's rags also connect him to a deeper pattern in Greek heroic tradition where disguise often precedes revelation. Suffering precedes triumph, and descent precedes ascent, like Demeter seeking her daughter or Dionysus testing his worshippers. Odysseus uses concealment to distinguish between those who recognize essential worth beneath superficial appearance, and those who judge solely by external trappings. As the day of the bow contest arrives, all players have taken their positions in the coming drama. Penelope has established the mechanism for selection among the suitors. Unaware, she has created the perfect opportunity for her husband's revenge. Telemachus has positioned himself as his father's ally while maintaining an outward show of neutrality. Eumaeus and the loyal cowherd Philoetius have been secretly informed of Odysseus's identity and enlisted in his cause. The suitors, blind to the approaching danger, continue their arrogant revelry. Odysseus himself, still in beggar's rags, but inwardly poised for action, watches and waits for the perfect moment to cast aside his disguise and reclaim his name, his home, and his throne. His long journey of physical wandering has ended. But the journey back to his true identity has reached its most dangerous crossing, the transformation from disguised observer to avenging king. Part 16. Dawn breaks on the day that will end 20 years of separation and suffering. Penelope, still unaware of her husband's presence, announces the contest she has devised. Odysseus's great bow will be brought forth, and whoever can string it and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads aligned in a row will win her hand in marriage. The bow itself carries deep significance. A gift from Iphitus, whom Heracles later killed, it represents Odysseus's past identity as warrior and hunter. For 20 years it has remained untouched, wrapped and stored away like the master's identity itself. Now it reemerges as the instrument of both testing and retribution. When Eumaeus brings the bow into the hall, he weeps at the sight of his master's weapon. Philoetius, the loyal cowherd who has also recognized the disguised Odysseus, likewise sheds tears. The suitors mock their emotion, unaware that these loyal servants have already been enlisted in the coming vengeance. The challenge proves immediately daunting. None of the younger suitors can even bend the bow enough to string it. Watching their futile efforts, Odysseus carefully observes each man, noting their strength and weakness, continuing his tactical assessment from his position of apparent insignificance. Antinous, recognizing the difficulty, suggests postponing the contest. Today is a festival of Apollo, god of archery, and perhaps the deity would be offended by their competition. This transparent excuse to save face reveals the suitors' growing awareness of their inadequacy. They who presume to replace Odysseus cannot even wield his weapon. At this critical moment, the disguised Odysseus approaches Telemachus and, through subtle signals, indicates he should allow the beggar to try the bow. Understanding his father's intent, Telemachus claims authority over the contest, stating that if he wishes to give the bow to the stranger, it is his right. Despite the suitor's objections, he orders Eumaeus to bring the bow to Odysseus. The moment the weapon touches his hands, the disguise begins its metaphorical disintegration. Homer describes the beggar's practiced examination of the bow, checking for worm damage, testing its flexibility with the expertise of a musician examining a lyre. This casual display of mastery offers the first public hint of his true identity. With seeming ease, Odysseus strings the bow that has defeated all the young suitors. The sound of the string tightening resonates through the hall like a swallow's note. Taking an arrow from the quiver, he sights along its shaft, then shoots through all 12 axe handles without missing, a feat of extraordinary precision that silences the hall. Amidst the stunned quiet, Odysseus gives Telemachus the signal for action. The young man girds himself with sword and spear, taking position beside his father. Only then does Odysseus cast off the final elements of his disguise. Standing tall on the threshold of his hall, a symbolically charged position connecting different domains, he announces himself. The contest is ended now for another target that no man has yet hit. With these words, he looses an arrow directly into Antinous' throat as the suitor lifts a wine cup to his lips. The leader of the suitors falls backward, blood spurting from his nostrils, his foot kicking the table and spilling food across the floor. This graphic detail, the feast becoming bloodied, the wine cup falling from lifeless hands, establishes the shocking transition from revelry to slaughter. Initial confusion grips the remaining suitors. They believe the killing must be accidental. What beggar would deliberately kill a nobleman? Only when Odysseus finally proclaims his true identity do they grasp the magnitude of their danger. You dogs! You never thought I would return from Troy. You devoured my household, forced yourselves on my serving women, and courted my wife while I still lived, fearing neither the gods nor human retribution. Now death's cords have fallen upon you all. This declaration transforms the violence from mere vengeance into justice. The restoration of divine and human law against those who violated every social boundary. Part 17. Odysseus positions himself not just as an aggrieved husband, but as an agent of cosmic order. Eurymachus, attempting to diffuse Odysseus's wrath, offers compensation, restitution for all they've consumed, plus 20 oxen from each suitor. Odysseus rejects this belated offer out of hand. No payment can atone for their transgressions, only blood will suffice. His refusal underscores the moral economy of the epic. Some violations go beyond material compensation, requiring the ultimate payment. Realizing negotiation has failed, the suitors draw their swords and look for shields. But Telemachus has already removed the armor from the hall on his father's instructions. Amphinomus charges Odysseus, but falls with an arrow through his liver. Eurymachus rushes forward next only to be speared in the back by Telemachus. What follows is a methodical slaughter. Odysseus continues firing arrows until his quiver empties, dropping suitors with each shot. Telemachus fetches additional weapons for his father, himself, and the loyal servants who have joined them, Eumaeus and Philoetius. The doors are secured, trapping the remaining suitors inside. The fighting becomes desperate as the outnumbered attackers face the remaining suitors. Athena appears in the form of mentor to encourage Odysseus, though she does not immediately grant victory. Instead, she tests the aging hero's strength and courage before finally intervening more directly. This divine restraint emphasizes that even with godly favor, human effort remains essential. Homer does not glorify the violence, but renders it with unflinching detail. Men fall with spears through their throats, swords piercing their chests, heads cleaved by bronze. The floor runs with blood. Men slip in gore as they try to flee. The hall echoes with death groans and the thud of falling bodies. This graphic depiction emphasizes the gravity of the suitors' transgressions. Their pleasant parasitism has culminated in horrific consequences. The battle peaks when Odysseus and his small band face off against the remaining suitors led by Agelaus. Athena finally displays her aegis, the fearsome shield bearing the Gorgon's head, from the rafters, filling the suitors with supernatural panic. Like cattle driven by a stinging fly, they scatter in terror only to be cut down one by one. The simile of hunted animals appears repeatedly. The suitors become like fish gasping on shore, like doves caught in a net, emphasizing their sudden transformation from predators to prey. Mercy comes for only two individuals. The bard Phemius, who had entertained the suitors under compulsion, begs for his life, claiming he served in the palace unwillingly. Similarly, the herald Medon, who had shown kindness to Telemachus, pleads for clemency. Telemachus intercedes for both, demonstrating temperance amidst the bloodshed and establishing himself as a worthy, ethical heir to his father. When the fighting ends, the hall resembles a shoreline after a bloody tide, littered with corpses like fish strewn across sand. Odysseus, spattered with blood and gore like a lion that has feasted on an ox, orders the disloyal serving women to clean the hall under Telemachus's supervision. These women, 12 in number, who had slept with the suitors and betrayed the household, are then taken outside and hanged in a grim extension of the purge. For the treacherous goatherd Melanthius, who had mocked and abused the disguised Odysseus and helped arm the suitors during the battle, an even harsher punishment awaits. His nose, ears, hands, and feet are cut off, and his genitals thrown to the dogs, a mutilation that expresses the extremity of his betrayal in physical terms. After this brutal cleansing, Odysseus orders the hall to be fumigated with burning sulfur, a ritual purification that serves both practical sanitation and symbolic cleansing. The physical space that had been corrupted by the suitor's presence must be ritually reclaimed before normal life can resume. Euryclea, the old nurse who had recognized Odysseus earlier, brings the loyal serving women to welcome their returned master. They surround him, kissing his head and hands, embracing him with tears of joy. This moment of tender reunion amid the aftermath of slaughter creates a powerful emotional counterpoint. The restoration of proper order brings not only justice but reconnection with those who remained faithful. Part 18. Yet for all its cathartic violence and emotional reunion, this sequence represents only partial restoration. Odysseus has reclaimed his palace and eliminated the internal threat, but he has not yet reclaimed his marriage. Penelope, who had retired to her chambers before the contest, remains unaware of the bloody events and her husband's true identity. When Euryclea rushes to inform Penelope that Odysseus has returned and slain the suitors, the queen's response is not immediate joy, but studied skepticism. Having protected herself from disappointment for so many years, she cannot simply surrender to hope. She suggests alternatively that some god must have killed the suitors or that the beggar must be someone else entirely. This final resistance to recognition creates the framework for the epic's most intimate and psychologically nuanced scene. After 20 years of separation, after a blood-soaked reclamation of his household, Odysseus must still face his most challenging test, convincing his brilliant, cautious wife that he has truly returned. The bout contest and slaughter of the suitors transforms the epic from a story of wandering to one of justice restored. It fulfills the prophecies of Tiresias and the divine will expressed since the poem's opening. Yet it also raises profound questions about violence, retribution, and restoration that the final books must address. The bloodshed has cleansed the palace, but healing the community, re-establishing political order, and truly reclaiming intimate relationships requires more than physical triumph. As night falls on the blood-soaked hall, Odysseus has eliminated his enemies, but stands on the threshold of his most meaningful homecoming, the reunion with the wife whose loyalty and intelligence match his own. This final recognition scene, approached with caution by both husband and wife, will determine whether Odysseus has truly returned home in the fullest sense of restoration. The blood has been washed from the palace floors. The bodies of the suitors have been claimed by their families. The disloyal servants have been punished. Yet, the most profound reunion still awaits. The recognition between husband and wife that will truly complete Odysseus's homecoming. Penelope descends from her chamber, her mind still clouded with doubt. For 20 years, she has maintained a delicate balance between hope and despair, either fully accepting Odysseus's death nor allowing herself to believe in his return. This emotional discipline, matching her husband's physical endurance, has preserved her autonomy and protected her heart. Now faced with claims of Odysseus's return, she approaches cautiously, unwilling to surrender her hard-won equilibrium to what might prove another disappointment. Entering the hall, she sees a stranger sitting by the fire, cleansed of blood and dressed in fresh clothing, but not immediately recognizable as her husband. Despite Telemachus's insistence that this man is indeed Odysseus, she maintains her reserve. "My child," she tells her frustrated son, "if he truly is Odysseus, come home. We will know each other better than anyone, for we have signs known only to the two of us." This insistence on private confirmation rather than public testimony reveals Penelope's wisdom. Throughout the epic, identities have proven malleable and deceptive. Odysseus himself has crafted false personas with ease. Divine beings have taken human form. Appearances have rarely aligned with reality. In this context, Penelope's caution is not stubborn denial, but appropriate skepticism, the feminine counterpart to Odysseus's own wariness with the Phaeacians, with Athena, with everyone he has encountered. Odysseus, though eager for recognition, respects her prudence. When Telemachus criticizes his mother's coldness, Odysseus defends her approach. "Let your mother test me as she will." This mutual respect for caution reflects their deep compatibility, each recognizing in the other a mind that refuses easy assumptions. Part 19. To create space for their reunion, Odysseus orchestrates a deception for any who might be watching the palace from outside. He orders music and dancing, ensuring that passers-by will hear sounds of celebration rather than recognizing the aftermath of slaughter. This final stratagem, a mock wedding feast masking a scene of carnage, provides cover for the genuine reunion about to unfold. Penelope orders the household servants to prepare the royal bed for the stranger, deliberately setting a subtle trap. When Odysseus responds with controlled outrage, the trap springs not on him, but on any impostor who might claim his identity. "Woman," he declares, "you cut me to the heart. Who has moved my bed? No man living, not even in full vigor, could easily move it. For I built that bed myself, and a great secret went into its making." He proceeds to describe in precise detail how he constructed their marriage bed around a living olive tree that grew within the palace walls, building the chamber around this immovable natural center. This bed, impossible to move without destroying it, stands as the perfect symbol for their marriage, rooted in the living earth. Crafted with skill, built to endure. This revelation finally breaks through Penelope's caution. The details of the bed's construction were known only to the two of them, and a single servant. No impostor could have this knowledge. The sign she sought, proof beyond physical appearance or martial prowess, has been provided in the most intimate form possible. Knowledge of the foundation of their marriage. Penelope's response transforms from skepticism to overwhelming emotion. Her knees weaken, her heart melts, and tears flow freely. She runs to Odysseus, throws her arms around him, and kisses his head. "Do not be angry with me for holding back," she pleads. "Always my heart feared that someone might deceive me with words. For many have plotted against us." Odysseus weeps in response, holding the wife he has longed for throughout his wanderings. Homer compares Penelope's welcome to the sight of land for a drowning sailor, the same metaphor used earlier for Odysseus reaching the Phaeacian shore after his shipwreck. This repetition suggests that his physical salvation remained incomplete without this emotional homecoming. Only now, recognized by the one who knows him most intimately, has Odysseus truly completed his return. Their reunion extends through the night as each shares their experiences of the intervening years. Odysseus recounts his wanderings, tales we have already heard him tell the Phaeacians, but which gain new significance when shared with his wife. Penelope describes her long resistance against the suitors, her tricks, her delays, her maintenance of hope against growing doubt. This exchange of narratives represents more than catching up on lost time. It is the reintegration of their separate stories into a shared history, bridging the 20-year gap in their marriage. Through mutual recognition of each other's suffering and endurance, they re-establish the deep understanding that forms the core of their relationship. Dawn approaches, but Athena holds it back, extending their night of reconnection beyond normal limits. This divine intervention, manipulating time itself to allow for complete reunion, emphasizes the cosmic significance of their bond. When they finally come together physically, it represents not merely the satisfaction of desire, but the restoration of proper order in both human and divine terms. With morning comes the awareness that their challenges are not yet complete. The families of the slain suitors will seek vengeance, potentially plunging Ithaca into civil war. Odysseus must visit his aging father, Laertes, who has retreated to a farm on the island's outskirts, living in self-imposed squalor, as he mourns his missing son. And beyond these immediate concerns lies Tiresias's prophecy: Odysseus must eventually undertake another journey inland, carrying an oar until he reaches people who mistake it for a winnowing fan. Part 20. The reunion with Laertes creates another emotional climax. Odysseus finds his father digging around a fruit tree, dressed in patched clothing, his hands calloused from labor inappropriate to his royal status. This self-imposed degradation, a physical manifestation of grief, moves Odysseus deeply. Yet once again, he approaches reunion through testing rather than immediate revelation. He creates one final false identity, claiming to be a stranger who once hosted Odysseus. This last deception proves too much for the old man to bear. Hearing his son spoken of as absent still, Laertes pours dust over his grey head in a gesture of mourning. The sight breaks Odysseus's resolve. He embraces his father, declaring his true identity and offering proof through knowledge of the orchard, naming each tree his father had given him as a boy, creating a botanical catalogue of their shared past. The inclusion of this scene, coming after the dramatic climax of the suitors' slaughter and the emotional peak of the reunion with Penelope, demonstrates the epic's expansive concept of homecoming. Odysseus's return is not complete without reconnection to his father, representing both his heritage and his future. The moment brings three generations together: Laertes, Odysseus, and Telemachus, who joins them at the farm. This continuity across time counterbalances the disruption of the 20-year absence. Meanwhile, news of the suitors' deaths spreads through Ithaca. Grief and anger grip their families, who gather the bodies for funeral rites. Eupeithes, father of Antinous, emerges as a leader, calling for vengeance against Odysseus. Despite the counsel of more moderate voices pointing out that the suitors brought destruction upon themselves, many armed for attack. The impending civil conflict threatens to taint Odysseus's triumph with further bloodshed. As the vengeful party approaches Laertes' farm, where Odysseus and his small band have retreated, the scene is set for a new cycle of violence, the blood feud that ancient Greek society recognized as an almost inevitable consequence of killing. Here, the gods intervene directly. Zeus and Athena confer on Olympus, determining that enough blood has been shed. Athena descends to the battlefield just as combat begins. After allowing minimal fighting, including a moment of glory for the aged Laertes, who successfully kills Eupeithes with a spear cast, she halts the conflict with a thunderous command. Her divine authority, backed by Zeus's thunderbolt, compels both sides to lay down their weapons. This divine imposition of peace provides a clear deus ex machina resolution to what would otherwise become an endless cycle of revenge. Homer recognizes that human societies, left to their own devices, often cannot escape the logic of retaliation. Divine intervention represents the transcendent principle necessary to break this cycle. Perhaps analogous to the development of legal systems and third-party justice that would eventually replace blood vengeance in Greek society. A formal pact is established between Odysseus and the families of the suitors, with Athena disguised as mentor overseeing the oaths. This political resolution complements the domestic restoration achieved through the reunions with Penelope and Laertes. Odysseus has reclaimed not just his household, but his kingdom. Not just his family roles, but his social position. The epic concludes with peace restored to Ithaca, the proper social order re-established, and Odysseus fully reintegrated into all dimensions of his identity as husband, father, son, and king. This comprehensive restoration fulfills the promise of Nostos, homecoming, that has driven the narrative from its opening lines. Yet Homer leaves us with the awareness that Odysseus's story is not entirely complete. Tiresias's prophecy about the inland journey remains unfulfilled, a future obligation that will eventually take the hero away from home once more. This unfinished business suggests that even the most perfect homecoming contains within it the seeds of future departure. Odysseus, the man of many turns, may find stability, but never stasis. This open-ended quality distinguishes the Odyssey from narratives of simple closure. Having explored the profound complexity of homecoming, its physical, emotional, social, and political dimensions, Homer acknowledges that no return can be absolute or permanent. Even as Odysseus reclaims his place at the center of concentric circles of connection, marriage, family, household, kingdom, the horizon of further journey remains visible. Part 21. In this tension between arrival and departure, between reunion and the inevitability of future separation, the epic finds its lasting resonance. We recognize in Odysseus's story not just the specific challenges of an ancient hero, but the universal human experience of seeking home while acknowledging its impermanence, of valuing connection precisely because we understand its fragility. The final image of Athena establishing peace captures this poignant balance. divine intervention creates a resolution that human effort alone could not achieve. Yet, this intervention comes in response to human struggle rather than replacing it. The gods honor Odysseus's extraordinary perseverance by granting him the peace his own actions could not secure, completing what he began through 2 decades of relentless effort to return. In this cooperation between mortal striving and divine grace, between human agency and cosmic order, the Odyssey finds its most profound meaning. Odysseus's journey, physical and spiritual, geographical and emotional, maps the full terrain of human experience against the backdrop of divine purpose. His homecoming becomes not just a personal achievement, but a restoration of proper relationship between mortal and immortal spheres, a rebalancing of a world thrown into chaos by war, absence, and transgression. As we leave Odysseus, finally at peace in Ithaca, recognized by all who matter to him, we understand why his story has endured for 3 millennia. In his determination to return, in his willingness to suffer extraordinary hardship rather than surrender his identity, in his capacity to adapt without losing his essential self, we recognize the highest potential of human resilience. And in the joy of his homecoming, however hard won, however shadowed by past suffering and future obligation, we glimpse the profound reward that makes such resilience worthwhile, the irreplaceable experience of belonging, of being known, of finally coming home. With Odysseus restored to his throne and peace established in Ithaca, Homer's narrative reaches its formal conclusion. Yet, the story of the Odyssey itself was just beginning its journey through human culture. Like its resourceful hero, this epic would travel across vast distances of time and space, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential identity. The poem's influence begins with its role in ancient Greek culture. Along with the Iliad, it served as a foundational text, simultaneously entertainment, moral guidebook, historical record, and religious reference. Children learned to read from Homer's lines. Public recitations brought communities together. Politicians quoted Homeric verses to support their arguments. The epics provided a common cultural language that united the otherwise fractious Greek city-states. When Greek civilization expanded through Alexander's conquests, and later through Roman adoption, Homer's reach extended accordingly. The Romans translated, adapted, and referenced Homeric material extensively. Virgil's Aeneid, the national epic of Rome, drew direct inspiration from both Homeric poems, particularly in its narrative structure and themes of fate and homecoming. This classical foundation ensured Homer's survival through the medieval period when many ancient texts were lost. Though direct knowledge of Homer diminished in Western Europe during these centuries, the stories remained alive through Latin summaries and adaptations. Meanwhile, Byzantine scholars preserved the original Greek texts, maintaining an unbroken tradition of Homeric scholarship in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Renaissance rediscovered Homer with enthusiasm, part of its broader recovery of classical learning. As Greek manuscripts found their way to Western Europe following the fall of Constantinople in 1453, scholars produced new translations and commentaries. Homer became essential reading for any educated person, influencing Renaissance literature, art, and philosophy. Each subsequent era found its own reflection in the Odyssey. The age of exploration drew parallels between Odysseus and contemporary navigators encountering new worlds. The Romantic period emphasized the poem's emotional depths and sublime natural imagery. Victorian scholars debated the historical reality behind the myth. Modernist writers recognized in Odysseus's fragmented journey a metaphor for the dislocations of modern life. Part 22. James Joyce's Ulysses, published in 1922, represents perhaps the most ambitious literary response to Homer's epic. By mapping the events of the Odyssey onto a single day in Dublin, Joyce suggested both the timelessness of Homeric themes and their relevance to ordinary modern experience. This reimagining, either direct adaptation nor simple allusion, demonstrates how deeply the Odyssey had become embedded in Western literary consciousness. Beyond literature, the epic has permeated virtually every artistic medium. Painters. From ancient Greek vase artists to Renaissance masters to modern abstractionists, have depicted scenes from the Odyssey. Composers have created operas, symphonies, and song cycles based on its episodes. Sculptors have captured moments of Odysseus's journey in stone and bronze. Filmmakers have adapted it directly or borrowed its structure for original stories. The impact extends beyond the arts into psychology, philosophy, and politics. Psychoanalysts found in Odysseus's journey a model for understanding the human mind. His encounters with external monsters representing internal psychological challenges. Philosophers from Aristotle to Heidegger have drawn on the epic to explore questions of identity, ethics, and human purpose. Political theorists have examined its portrayal of leadership, community, and the tension between individual excellence and social responsibility. Even our language bears the imprint of this ancient poem. Terms like siren song, between Scylla and Charybdis, and lotus cedar have entered common usage, often employed by people unaware of their Homeric origins. The very concept of an Odyssey, as a long, challenging journey, has transcended its source to become a universal metaphor. What explains this extraordinary cultural persistence? Why has this particular story, among countless ancient narratives, maintained such powerful resonance across millennia? Perhaps the answer lies in the Odyssey's unique balance of opposites, its simultaneous embrace of adventure and homecoming, individualism and community, fantasy and realism, divine intervention and human agency. Unlike many heroic tales that focus exclusively on martial prowess or supernatural conflict, the Odyssey encompasses both the extraordinary and the everyday, both cosmic forces and intimate human relationships. Odysseus himself embodies this balance. He encounters gods and monsters, yet remains recognizably human in his desires, flaws, and relationships. His most defining quality, adaptability, makes him paradoxically timeless, capable of translation into endlessly varied cultural contexts. He is the hero who survives not through unchanging strength, but through perpetual transformation, an ideal protagonist for a world in constant flux. The poem's exploration of homecoming likewise transcends its specific historical setting. The tension between wandering and return, between exploring the unknown and preserving connection to the familiar, represents a fundamental human dynamic across cultures and eras. As civilization has become increasingly mobile and boundaries increasingly fluid, the Odyssey's meditation on home's meaning has only grown more relevant. Moreover, the epic's narrative sophistication, its complex temporal structure, its shifts in perspective, its blend of genres from adventure to romance to family drama, creates a richness that rewards endless reinterpretation. Each generation finds new aspects to emphasize, new interpretive frameworks to apply. Feminist readings explore Penelope's agency and the gendered power dynamics of the household. Post-colonial approaches examine the portrayal of foreign lands and peoples from the perspective of the Greek insider. Psychological interpretations probe the internal dimensions of Odysseus's external challenges. This interpretive flexibility extends to translation as well. The Odyssey has been rendered into virtually every major world language, often in multiple versions that reflect different understandings of the original. Each new translation inevitably interprets as much as it translates, emphasizing different aspects of Homer's multifaceted original. Some foreground the poem's oral origins and performative qualities. Others focus on its narrative drive. Still others highlight its poetic imagery or philosophical implications. In English alone, the tradition of Odyssey translation spans from George Chapman's vigorous Elizabethan version to Alexander Pope's elegant Augustan couplets. From Richmond Lattimore's scholarly precision to Robert Fitzgerald's poetic mid-century modernism. From Robert Fagel's accessible dignity to Emily Wilson's recent emphasis on narrative pace and contemporary resonance. Each version creates in effect a new poem in dialogue with both the ancient original and the translator's contemporary moment. Part 23. This ongoing process of reinterpretation and retranslation ensures that the Odyssey remains not a static monument but a living cultural force, continually renewed through engagement with changing social contexts. Each era reads the poem differently. Yet something essential persists across these varied readings. Some core truth about human experience that transcends historical specificity. Perhaps this essence lies in the poem's fundamental humanity. Its recognition that even a hero touched by divine favor must navigate the universal challenges of identity, relationship, and mortality. Odysseus faces supernatural dangers, but also confronts the profoundly ordinary challenges of aging, family strain, and community conflict. His story acknowledges both human vulnerability and human resilience, both our subjection to forces beyond our control and our capacity for meaningful action within those constraints. In an age of unprecedented global mobility and technological transformation, when traditional concepts of home, identity, and community face radical redefinition, the Odyssey offers neither simple nostalgia for fixed origins, nor uncritical embrace of perpetual wandering. Instead, it suggests that meaningful identity requires both movement and return, both adaptation and continuity, both individual excellence and social connection. This nuanced vision may explain why the Odyssey continues to inspire not just scholarly analysis, but creative response across cultures. Contemporary authors from Derek Walcott in the Caribbean to Margaret Atwood in Canada, from Nikos Kazantzakis in Greece to Ralph Ellison in America have engaged with the epic's themes and structures, finding in Odysseus a figure capable of addressing distinctly modern questions of displacement, belonging, and selfhood. The Odyssey endures not as a distant relic, but as a living dialogue partner in our ongoing cultural conversation. When we read or hear or watch adaptations of this ancient story, we participate in one of humanity's longest continuous intellectual traditions, a tradition that connects us across the vast distances of time and space to countless others who have found meaning in His tale of wandering and return. As we leave Odysseus at peace in Ithaca, we recognize that his journey, like the journey of the poem itself, contains the seeds of further movement. The prophecy of Tiresias points toward future travels. The continuing translations and adaptations ensure ongoing cultural voyage. The hero may finally rest, but his story sails on, continuing to explore the endless sea of human experience in all its terror and wonder, its suffering and joy, its complexity and beauty. Like Odysseus himself, we are all caught between wandering and homecoming, between exploration and connection, between transformative experience and enduring identity. In this tension, the Odyssey finds its immortal resonance, speaking across 3,000 years with a voice that somehow feels like our own, telling us a story that, for all its ancient strangeness, we recognize as fundamentally ours. Part 24. The story of the journey home resonates deeply within the human experience, evoking a sense of belonging that extends beyond mere shelter to encompass identity, connection, and purpose. For thousands of years, across countless cultures, the narrative of returning homeward has captivated our collective imagination, reflecting our deepest longings and struggles against forces that threaten to leave us adrift. When Odysseus set sail from the smoldering ruins of Troy, he anticipated a swift return, a journey of a few weeks. Instead, it would consume a decade of his life, 10 years filled with encounters with monsters and gods, temptations and terrors, profound loss and transformative experiences. The enduring power of his story, even 3 millennia after its first telling, stems from our ability to recognize aspects of ourselves in Odysseus, the part that yearns for home while simultaneously being drawn to adventure, the part that grapples with duty versus desire, the part that must confront both external obstacles and internal demons on the path to self-completion. Even in our contemporary world, echoes of Odysseus are everywhere, in soldiers returning from war, irrevocably changed by their experiences, in refugees navigating perilous waters, dreaming of safety, in wanderers seeking to rediscover their true selves. At its core, the hero's journey is a path of transformation. We depart as one person and return as another, shaped by what we've endured, what we've lost, and what we've learned. This epic is not merely an ancient adventure tale, it serves as a profound map of the human experience itself. To truly understand this timeless narrative, we must first comprehend the world that birthed it, a world that was already ancient history to Homer himself. The events depicted are believed to have taken place around 1200 BCE, during the twilight of what is now known as the Bronze Age. This was a sophisticated world characterized by grand palaces, intricate trade networks, developed writing systems, royal bureaucracies, powerful city-states, and significant naval power. However, this established world was on the precipice of collapse. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, civilization across the eastern Mediterranean experienced a catastrophic breakdown. Great cities were destroyed, empires fell, writing systems were lost, and trade networks disintegrated. The precise causes remain debated: climate change, earthquakes, invasions, internal revolts, or some combination of these factors. Nevertheless, the result was clear. A complex international system was replaced by centuries of what scholars call the Greek Dark Age. It was during this period that the stories of the Trojan War and its aftermath were preserved and transmitted orally, passed down from generation to generation. When these tales were finally committed to writing, likely in the 8th century BC, they captured memories of a lost golden age, filtered through centuries of oral tradition. This imparts a fascinating double perspective to the poem. It is set in the Bronze Age world of kings and heroes, but was composed in the emerging world of city-states, colonization, and renewed literacy. Archaeologists have long debated the extent of historical truth that might underpin Homer's epic. Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy in the 1870s proved that the city itself was no mere legend. Excavations at Mycenae Pylus and Ithaca have revealed palace complexes not unlike those described in the poems. Yet this work is not a historical account, it is something more profound, a cultural memory transformed into art. Blending myth with reality, the divine with the human, and the fantastical with the painfully real. Sing to me, O Muse, of the man of many devices. These words begin one of humanity's greatest literary achievements. Yet the identity of the person who composed them remains one of literature's most enduring mysteries. Who was Homer? Was he a single poetic genius? A collective name for many bards? A woman rather than a man, as some scholars have suggested? We may never know for certain. Ancient traditions describe Homer as a blind poet from the region of Ionia, in what is now western Turkey. 7 cities claim to be his birthplace. His name itself may derive from a word meaning hostage, or one who follows. Whatever the truth of his identity, Homer has come to represent the pinnacle of a sophisticated oral poetic tradition, a tradition that allowed epics of astounding complexity to be composed and transmitted without writing. How was this possible? Homeric poetry relied on what scholars call formulaic composition. This was not simple memorization of fixed texts. Rather, poets mastered a vast repertoire of metrical phrases, repeated scenes, and traditional story patterns that could be woven together during performance. These poets, known as awada or singers, were essentially oral composers, recreating the epic anew with each performance while maintaining its essential structure and themes. They were the living libraries of their culture, preserving not just stories but values, history, and collective identity. Part 25. Sometime around the 8th century BC, the revolutionary technology of alphabetic writing made it possible to capture these oral epics in written form. Whether this happened at the request of a ruler like Pisistratos of Athens, as some traditions claim, or through some other process, the result transformed human culture forever. The text we read today bears the marks of its oral origins. Recurring phrases like wine-dark sea and gray-eyed Athena, familiar scenes that follow predictable patterns, and narrative techniques that would have aided memory and performance. Yet it also shows signs of a unified artistic vision that only a master poet or poets could achieve. This ancient masterpiece is not simply a straightforward adventure tale. Its structure is as ingenious as its hero, employing sophisticated narrative techniques that would influence storytelling for millennia to come. Perhaps most striking is Homer's decision to begin in medias res, in the middle of things, rather than starting with Odysseus leaving Troy. We first meet our hero in his 7th year of captivity on Calypso's island. The preceding adventures, the Cyclops, the Sirens Scylla, and Charybdis, are related later through Odysseus's own narration to the Phaeacians. This creates a complex temporal structure. The poem's 24 books cover about 40 days of present time, yet encompass a decade of wandering through flashbacks and storytelling. It's a narrative architecture that feels remarkably modern in its complexity. The story also employs what scholars call ring composition, a structure where themes and motifs appear, then reappear in reverse order, creating a symmetrical pattern. It begins and ends with divine assemblies. Telemachus's journey in search of news about his father mirrors Odysseus's own return voyage. The hospitality Telemachus receives from Nestor and Menelaus contrasts with the violation of hospitality by the suitors at home. These patterns aren't merely decorative. They create meaningful contrasts and parallels that deepen our understanding of the poem's themes. The very language reflects this intricacy. Written in dactylic hexameter, 6 metrical feet per line, each foot typically containing one long syllable followed by 2 short ones, the Greek text has a distinctive rhythm that carried both artistic and memory-aiding power. This meter became synonymous with epic poetry in the Western tradition. When we compare this epic to its companion work, the Iliad, we see fascinating contrasts. While the Iliad focuses on wrath, glory, and death in the narrow confines of the Trojan battlefield, this journey embraces a wider geographical and emotional range. It's a poem not of martial glory, but of survival. Not of dying nobly, but of living wisely, not of conquering others, but of conquering oneself. At the center of this vast narrative stands its protagonist, a hero unlike any that came before him. Odysseus represents a new kind of heroic ideal, one that would prove remarkably enduring. In the Iliad, Odysseus is a significant but secondary figure, a capable warrior and respected counselor, but overshadowed by greater fighters like Achilles and Ajax. His true moment comes after that epic ends, when he conceives the Trojan horse, the stratagem that finally defeats Troy after 10 years of stalemated warfare. This emphasis on intellect over brute force defines Odysseus. His very name suggests trouble and cunning, possibly derived from the Greek verb odysasthai, meaning to be wrathful against or to hate, but carrying undertones of troublemaking and deception. Homer reinforces this identity through Odysseus's descriptive titles. He is Polytropos, man of many turns or many ways. He is Polymedes, of many devices or much cunning. He is Polymekanos, of various wiles. These qualities, rather than strength or speed, define his heroism. This emphasis on intelligence reflects a shift in heroic values. The post-Trojan War world rewards not those who can conquer cities, but those who can navigate complex social and supernatural threats while preserving their identity and relationships. Odysseus represents survival through adaptability, a hero for uncertain times. Yet Odysseus's defining strength becomes his tragic flaw. His cleverness breeds hubris, most fatally in the Cyclops episode, where he cannot resist revealing his true name to the blinded Polyphemus. This act of intellectual pride triggers Poseidon's wrath and condemns his men to years of suffering. There's an inherent duality to Odysseus that makes him fascinatingly human. He is both the faithful husband who rejects immortality to return to Penelope, and the wanderer who spends years in other women's beds. He is both the loving father who weeps at the sight of his son and the commander whose recklessness costs his entire crew their lives. He is both the master storyteller who charms the Phaeacians and the master liar who deceives friend and foe alike. This complexity makes Odysseus the first truly psychological hero in Western literature, a man whose internal struggles are as compelling as his external adventures. His journey is not just across dangerous seas, but through the treacherous waters of his own nature.